What began as a routine 911 call about possible fireworks quickly spiraled into a tense standoff between police and a family accused of hiding a gunman, with witnesses pointing to the apartment, conflicting stories from residents, and children caught in the middle. Officers had to untangle lies from truth before the night erupted into chaos. The incident began with a simple but alarming question. Did you guys hear gunshots? An officer repeated it, trying to confirm what the bystanders already suspected. Someone answered, "You did," indicating that yes, they had heard what sounded like gunfire. Immediately, tension filled the air. Gunshots in a residential neighborhood are never taken lightly. Officers needed to know not only whether people had heard the sound but also exactly where it came from. The line of questioning shifted quickly. Did you know where? Or this one right here? The urgency was clear. Pinpointing the origin of the shots could mean the difference between finding an active shooter or defusing a false alarm. As this questioning unfolded, a call came across the radio. Dispatch advised officers that they had received a report of a physical dispute at 509 Engelhardt Terrace. That address now became the center of attention. The message was firm. Be advised, we got a report of a physical dispute at 509 Engelhardt Terrace. Come see if you can have another town respond to Engelhardt. Reinforcements were needed in case the situation spiraled into violence. Officers immediately moved toward the location, urging residents to step outside for safety. Come outside, absolutely, come outside, one officer ordered, trying to maintain authority while also preventing panic. At this point, they needed to identify exactly who lived in which apartment. A woman was questioned, "Are you apartment B?" She hesitated, responding with confusion. "What?" Again, the officers pressed. "What apartment number are you?" She gave inconsistent answers. First, yeah, B6, then B, or A. Finally, the officers clarified, "What apartment number are you? A or B, or apartment letter?" Her hesitation only raised suspicion. Was she nervous because of the police presence, or was she trying to hide something? The officers grew more direct. "Can you come outside, Senora?" Outside still. No clear answers came. One officer reported over the radio, 5, no problem yet. That was a relief, at least temporarily, but the tension hadn't disappeared. Officers asked her repeatedly to come down the stairs. Come down, Senora, come down. Another officer instructed his colleague, "Yo, go take the front. Make sure no one leaves." They were sealing off the area, treating it like a potential crime scene. Then came the crucial question, who's in the house? The woman finally gave some information. My husband, my daughter." Officers immediately instructed her to bring them down. "Okay, come down, come down, come down." But the concern wasn't only about who was inside, was about what might be inside. What's going on? Were you guys playing? You guys have a gun inside the home or anything like that? The woman denied it. Another voice interjected, "Hey, how are you? Are you apartment B?" The woman insisted, "No, he only listen music." Her words were broken and unclear, raising more doubt about her credibility. Meanwhile, another piece of information surfaced. Someone claimed the suspect had jumped in a car. Officers countered that with, "No, he came out of that car. Where's that?" There was clear confusion. Again, the questioning turned back to the apartment. Who else is in the apartment? At first, she said only her children were inside. My kids, my men. Then she confirmed, and that's it. But when confronted with her earlier statement, she admitted, "Yeah, my husband, my kids." The inconsistency was obvious, and one officer responded bluntly, "Now you lied to me because you said your husband's up there." The officers didn't want to take any chances. They demanded, "Can you have them all come out? Have everybody come out. Have everyone come out." The woman hesitated again, asking if she should bring her kids, or with my kids. Officers answered firmly, Yeah, everybody, but make sure your hands are." The warning was necessary. According to witnesses, somebody had fired a gun in that apartment. One officer reminded her, "Somebody said somebody shot a gun in your apartment. You understand?" She nervously agreed. "Yeah." The officer pressed, "Somebody said they shot a gun off. Did you hear that?" Her response was strange. "It's pretty funny." That remark didn't match the seriousness of the situation. She then tried to clarify, "No, do you know under gun?" Gun. The language barrier was clear, but the officers persisted. "Yeah, is there guns in there?" Her explanation was vague. "We thought it was fireworks, to be honest," but I guess her words trailed off. Fireworks often get mistaken for gunfire, but in this case, multiple 911 calls had already been made. Officers needed clarity, like what's going on outside. The original caller from picking up the phone. Dispatch had relayed that a 911 call reported someone firing shots into the air, and that the shooter had gone into this very apartment. "We got a 911 that somebody said they shot a gun in the air and they went to your apartment." Her denial was immediate. No, but another problem surfaced. Neighbors had seen people entering the apartment who weren't family members, but there were people here from who went into their apartment that said that's what happened. The officers then shifted their questioning. They asked about a white car nearby. "Do you know whose white car that is?" She denied knowledge. "No, The officers pointed it out directly. "You see the white Mustang over there? Is it Mustang?" The story was unraveling. Witnesses, neighbors, and even anonymous callers were giving police consistent descriptions. The shooters had been seen by the dumpster, aiming a weapon upward, and a flash was spotted in the dark sky. Meanwhile, those inside the apartment gave conflicting stories: fireworks, music, or nothing at all. By this point, the officers had pieced together enough to know the situation wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had indeed fired a weapon. The problem was figuring out who inside was lying and who was telling the truth. With children present, emotions running high, and multiple witnesses pointing toward the apartment, the scene was quickly escalating into something far more serious than just a noise complaint. The confusion outside the apartment was not easing up. Officers were already cautious, knowing that when firearms are involved, hesitation can be deadly. They had multiple reports suggesting that gunfire came from the direction of this apartment, but the residents inside continued to deny any knowledge. The woman at the center of questioning kept offering vague, inconsistent explanations, which made it nearly impossible for the officers to fully trust her words. When she mentioned music and fireworks, the credibility of her statements sank even lower. Fireworks, while often confused with gunshots, do not usually result in numerous frantic 911 calls. The difference between a sharp crack of gunfire and the booming sparkle of fireworks might be subtle for some ears, but seasoned officers could almost always tell the difference. Tensions rose as neighbors stood by, whispering and pointing toward the building. Many of them had heard the sound, and some even claimed to see a flash in the night sky. Such eyewitness accounts are invaluable, but they also add pressure. Officers must weigh them carefully, since frightened residents can exaggerate or misinterpret events. Still, when multiple people give the same account, it adds credibility. The mention of individuals by the dumpster firing upward was consistent across more than one source. Meanwhile, the officers tried to balance assertiveness with calm. They had to ensure no one inside the apartment felt cornered enough to make a reckless decision. Children were said to be inside, and whenever kids are part of a volatile situation, the risk multiplies. That is why officers insisted again and again, have everyone come out. They wanted to clear the apartment systematically, removing each person so that the situation could be neutralized without unnecessary escalation. The woman's nervousness, however, kept raising red flags. When first asked who was inside, she only mentioned her children. Then, under pressure, she admitted her husband was present too. At another point, she seemed to suggest more people were involved but then backtracked. This inconsistency made the officers suspect she was protecting someone or hiding the truth entirely. That, combined with the unusual remark about the situation being pretty funny, convinced the officers that they were not getting straightforward answers. As the officers stood outside, another detail shifted attention. The white car parked nearby. They specifically noted a white Mustang. Witnesses tied the vehicle to the suspects who had allegedly fired the weapon and then gone back inside the building. When questioned about it, the woman denied knowing anything about the car. Her lack of cooperation, intentional or not, added to the overall suspicion. On the police radio, updates continued to stream in. Dispatch reminded them that the original 911 caller claimed someone had fired shots into the air and then entered this apartment. That report couldn't be ignored, even if the residents kept insisting otherwise. The officers now had to act with caution but also with determination. The next phase of the encounter was delicate. Officers needed to control the perimeter. One officer had already been told to cover the front to ensure no one slipped out unnoticed. Others had their eyes on windows, doors, and potential escape routes. This wasn't just a matter of keeping suspects in. It was also about ensuring the safety of bystanders. Crowds had started to gather nearby, curious about the flashing lights and raised voices. Crowds are unpredictable, and in tense moments, even a small distraction could jeopardize officers' safety. The repeated questioning of the woman was partly for clarity and partly a tactical measure. Officers often repeat questions in high-stress situations, watching carefully for inconsistencies. A person telling the truth usually repeats their story consistently, but someone lying will often shift details or hesitate. The woman's answers were fractured, contradictory, and inconsistent. For the officers, this was practically confirmation that something serious was being hidden. Her comment about fireworks was particularly suspicious. While it was possible, the circumstances made it unlikely. Why would neighbors report gunfire with such urgency if it had only been fireworks? Why would multiple witnesses describe seeing flashes near the dumpster, if not muzzle flashes? And why would the original 911 caller specifically say the suspect went into this very apartment afterward? All of these elements pointed in one direction, and it wasn't fireworks. At this point, one officer shifted strategy. Instead of focusing only on what happened inside the apartment, he asked about the outside activity, who had been walking near the dumpster, whether anyone had been seen handling fireworks or guns, and if the residents noticed anyone unusual in the area. By broadening the questions, officers hoped the woman would slip up or reveal something she had been holding back. Unfortunately, her responses stayed vague. She denied knowledge of the Mustang, She insisted no one had fired a weapon, and she continued to emphasize music and harmless noise. Yet her body language told another story: nervous movements, broken sentences, and a tone that wavered between defensiveness and hesitation. For experienced officers, these were clear signals that she was either scared of telling the truth or deliberately concealing it. The officer's patience was wearing thin. One reminded her firmly, "Somebody said they shot a gun off in your apartment. Did you hear that?" When she tried to brush it aside, he pressed harder. "Somebody said they shot a gun in the air and went to your apartment." This direct confrontation was a way of signaling to her that the police weren't working with rumors. They had hard reports. Still, her denial came quickly. No, she wouldn't budge. At that moment, the officers faced a challenge common in police work: knowing the truth but not yet having the evidence in hand to prove it. Without seeing the weapon, without direct confirmation from someone inside, their hands were tied to procedure. They couldn't storm in without cause, especially with children present. The scene had now developed into a standoff of sorts, not one with barricades and weapons pointed, but one of words and positioning. Officers had enough reason to suspect criminal activity, but not enough to act without caution. They would need to strategize their next move carefully. Should they attempt to gain voluntary compliance and have everyone exit peacefully? Or should they prepare for a tactical entry, knowing the risks inside might be higher than anyone admitted? As the minutes ticked by, the weight of uncertainty pressed down on everyone. The night air buzzed with tension. The flashing lights of patrol cars illuminated the street, and neighbors stood back, murmuring their own theories about what had really happened. The officers knew one thing for certain: someone wasn't telling the full truth. The standoff feeling around the apartment only deepened as more details filtered in. Officers knew they could not let the situation linger indefinitely. Every extra minute meant the potential for evidence to disappear, for suspects to escape, or for a weapon to be hidden. The residents inside, especially the woman who had been questioned, were not providing reliable answers. First, she claimed only her kids were present. Then, reluctantly, she added her husband. Later, she seemed to suggest other people had been inside but avoided naming them. That constant shifting of her story gave officers the impression that more individuals might still be hiding somewhere inside. The children complicated everything. From the very start, officers had to factor their safety into every decision. Telling the woman to bring them outside wasn't just protocol, it was a necessary step to prevent the risk of crossfire or confusion should the situation escalate. Officers repeated instructions slowly and clearly, emphasizing that everyone needed to come out with their hands visible. This was not meant to frighten the family but to establish control in an unpredictable moment. By now, backup had arrived. More units circled the area, and additional officers positioned themselves at key vantage points. The perimeter tightened. Patrol cars blocked exits in nearby streets to prevent a possible getaway by vehicle. Attention shifted again to the white Mustang. The vehicle's presence was suspicious because witnesses had connected it to the initial gunfire. Officers studied it carefully, noting whether it was still occupied, whether anyone attempted to approach it, or if it might contain evidence. Conversations with neighbors continued at the same time. Several witnesses confirmed seeing two men near the dumpster, one holding a firearm and pointing it into the air. The description of a flash accompanying the loud popping sound gave the story. Wait, it sounded much more like gunfire than fireworks. Fireworks do not usually produce a single flash in the same direction. They scatter, spray, and linger. The witnesses insisted this was different. The light was brief, sharp, and unmistakable. The challenge was tying that outdoor incident directly to the people inside the apartment. That was why the officers pressed the woman repeatedly about who had entered her home. If the suspects seen near the dumpster ran inside, the apartment could now be harboring both residents and outsiders. Her denial about strangers being present seemed flimsy, given how nervous she appeared. One officer noted to the others that her body language was defensive: crossed arms, darting eyes, and hesitation before every answer. To trained eyes, those cues often mean concealment. Meanwhile, the radio traffic grew steady. Commanders wanted updates. Had the suspects been identified? Was the weapon located? Had the residents complied? Each officer on scene gave clipped, professional reports, but underneath the radio chatter was an undercurrent of urgency. If shots had truly been fired into the air, it meant someone in the neighborhood had recklessly discharged a firearm in a residential area, crime with serious implications for safety. The strategy evolved into a step-by-step extraction. Officers intended to remove the occupants one at a time, beginning with the children. They hoped that once the kids were safely outside, the parents would feel more pressure to cooperate. But even that plan depended on the woman's willingness to comply. If she continued to resist or delay, officers would be forced to take firmer action. They could not allow potential shooters to remain barricaded behind a door while evidence of a firearm sat somewhere inside. Another angle officers considered was language. The woman's broken English sometimes made her answers confusing, and it was possible that certain words like fireworks or music were attempts to simplify her explanation. To counter this, bilingual officers or translators were often called to similar scenes. Communication errors can be just as dangerous as intentional lies. If she didn't fully understand the gravity of the officer's questions, her casual responses could be misinterpreted as deceit. Still, the inconsistencies were too glaring to dismiss entirely. All the while, the neighborhood watched from the shadows. Some residents filmed the scene on their phones, whispering nervously about what was unfolding. Others huddled behind curtains, peeking through windows at the flashing lights. Police presence always draws attention, but when firearms are mentioned, fear spreads quickly. Parents ushered their children indoors, worried about stray bullets or sudden violence. The entire block felt the ripple effect of what had begun as just a noise complaint. Inside the apartment, time ticked on. The woman had been given several opportunities to bring out her husband and children, yet progress was slow. Officers had to decide whether to wait longer or escalate. The command structure leaned toward patience. The last thing anyone wanted was a forced entry that might put the children at risk. Still, they made preparations. Tactical units nearby were briefed. Shields and less lethal equipment were readied, and medics stood by in case injuries occurred. The white Mustang remained a silent witness. Officers carefully checked whether it had been reported stolen or tied to any other incidents. While one group kept watch on the apartment, another ran the license plate through the system. If the vehicle linked back to someone inside, it could provide a crucial piece of evidence. Finally, attention returned to the original report. Dispatch repeated what had been logged. A caller heard shots, saw individuals, and then tracked them running into this exact apartment. That consistency, combined with the eyewitness reports from neighbors, left little room for doubt. Something had happened here. What remained unclear was whether the residents would admit to it voluntarily or continue denying it until hard evidence forced the truth out. The officer's questions grew sharper. Were you guys playing? Did you guys have a gun inside? Did anyone shoot in the air? Each time the woman shook her head, offering only half-hearted explanations. One officer reminded her, almost as a warning, somebody said they shot a gun in your apartment. When she responded with laughter earlier, it had been unsettling. Now, as the seriousness of the situation weighed on her, the laughter was gone. She seemed cornered, reluctant, but still unwilling to confess. The delicate balance between patience and authority continued. Officers knew they had to tread carefully. Too much pressure could make the family panic. Too little pressure, and the suspects could regroup, destroy evidence, or slip away. Every decision carried weight, and every second mattered. The tension in Section 3 built toward an inevitable conclusion. The officers would soon need to take decisive action. The family's evasive answers, the eyewitness reports, the suspicious vehicle, all of it added up to probable cause. The only question was how to proceed without endangering the innocent children inside or the officers standing watch outside. By this stage, the investigation had turned into a slow grind between truth and denial. The officers were armed with reports, suspicions, and multiple witness accounts, while the residents inside clung to half answers and vague denials. The tension in the neighborhood was thick. Patrol cars lined the street, lights casting red and blue patterns on the walls of the apartment complex. The air was heavy with anticipations. Something was going to break, and everyone watching seemed to know it. The primary task remained unchanged: get everyone out of the apartment safely. The woman who had been questioned was still the key. She was the only consistent link between the officers and those inside. Yet her answers continued to wobble between honesty and concealment. Sometimes she said her kids were inside. Other times she mentioned her husband. At one point, she hinted at other people being present but stopped short of confirming it. For the officers, every inconsistency reinforced the idea that suspects were hiding, perhaps hoping the situation outside would eventually calm down and the police would leave. Officers on scene did not have that option. Leaving would mean ignoring credible 911 calls and eyewitness statements. It would mean risking that someone inside, who had already discharged a firearm recklessly, might do it again later. This was a matter of community safety now, not just a private dispute. That's why officers pressed harder. They instructed the woman again, bring everyone outside, children first, then the adults, hands visible, no sudden movements. It was a routine command but necessary in this kind of situation. The crowd around the scene had grown. Neighbors stood further back now, pushed behind police tape, but their murmurs filled the night air. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. Was there really a shooter inside? Would police go in with force? Or would the family surrender peacefully? In the age of smartphones, many spectators filmed the unfolding scene, ready to capture whatever came next. Officers were keenly aware of this. Every move they made was under public scrutiny, another layer of pressure in an already complicated case. Inside, the atmosphere was harder to read. Officers could only guess at the conversations happening behind the closed door. Was the husband debating whether to come out? Were the kids crying, confused about the flashing lights and loud voices? Was someone inside trying to hide a firearm under furniture or in a closet? Without direct visibility, every possibility had to be considered. The white Mustang outside continued to draw attention. Officers circled it, checking doors, shining flashlights through the windows. If the car was connected to the shooters, there could be fingerprints, shell casings, or even the weapon itself hidden inside. The vehicle represented both a lead and a risk. If a suspect inside the apartment still had the keys, they might try to bolt toward it. That's why officers had already stationed someone nearby, eyes fixed on the car, ready to respond at the slightest movement. Then came a renewed push from command. Over the radio, supervisors reminded the officers that probable cause was already established. Multiple independent witnesses had described gunfire. The original 911 caller identified the apartment directly. Residents had been evasive and inconsistent in their statements. These elements, taken together, gave officers the legal grounds to escalate if voluntary compliance failed. The safety of children inside was the only factor delaying a tactical entry. One officer stepped forward again, calling out to the woman in a firm but controlled voice. He reminded her of what was at stake. Somebody said they shot a gun in your apartment. We need everyone outside. Now the tone was no longer just questioning, it was an order. The woman hesitated, glancing back inside before responding weakly. Her answers were lost in the noise of the street, but her body language showed resistance. This hesitation placed officers in a difficult position. They had to decide whether her delays were caused by fear, confusion, or outright defiance. If she was scared of her husband or someone else inside, her reluctance could be a sign of intimidation. If she was simply lying to protect someone, it meant she was actively obstructing the investigation. Either way, the delay endangered everyone. Time stretched, and the officers began preparing for entry. Shields were lifted from patrol trunks, tactical gear was checked, and less lethal options like beanbag rounds and pepper spray were readied. The plan was not to storm in recklessly but to be prepared if negotiation failed. Safety was the guiding principle, safety for the officers, for the neighbors, and for the children inside the apartment. As preparations continued, witnesses nearby were questioned again. One neighbor repeated the same story, 2 men near the dumpster, one raising a weapon into the air, the flash, the sound. Another confirmed that they saw those men run directly into the building afterward. The consistency of these accounts gave officers confidence. This was not just a misunderstanding about fireworks. This was gunfire in a neighborhood full of families. Meanwhile, the woman finally stepped out again, this time holding one of her children's hands. The sight relieved some tension, but also confirmed officers' suspicion others were still inside. She had been stalling, whether out of fear or loyalty, but now she was complying piece by piece. Officers guided her and the child toward safety, instructing them to move slowly, hands visible. The process was calm but strict. Now the focus turned to the remaining individuals inside. Officers called for the husband directly, demanding that he come out with his hands raised. The silence that followed was thick with uncertainty. Every officer braced for the possibility that he might refuse. If he did, entry would be inevitable. After a pause, footsteps were heard, and a man appeared in the doorway. His movements were cautious, his hands partially raised. Officers ordered him forward, step by step, until he was safely outside. But questions still lingered. Were these the only people inside? Or had others, the possible shooters, slipped in and hidden themselves? Officers could not take the woman's word for it. A systematic clearance of the apartment would be necessary. Once the immediate family was out, officers prepared to enter and search room by room, ensuring no one else remained inside and no firearm was left unsecured. The conclusion of this standoff was not explosive but careful, measured, and methodical. Officers prioritized safety above all else. They relied on witness accounts, the consistency of evidence, and their own instincts built from training. The family's inconsistent stories had made the process far more tense than it needed to be, but the goal remained the same: protect the community from reckless gunfire and ensure no lives were lost in the process. As the final family members stepped outside and officers prepared for a controlled search, the neighborhood watched with silent relief. What began as the sound of gunshots had transformed into a full-scale police operation, a reminder of how quickly normal life can be disrupted by a single reckless act. For the officers, it was another night of balancing patience with authority, caution with urgency, and truth with denial, an exhausting but necessary duty to keep the community safe.